With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson hanging out with the big man,
the
S.J.
Jennings. Well, moving the team.
And yeah, man, I got to say before we step into this one, because this is a new series.
Yeah.
And man, it was great to hear from different allies and friends and listeners about the biblical masculinity and kingdom masculinity, and I think we hit that one long and hard.
I'm chuckling because in our my Monday night group, shout out to the Rangers, the Fire Pit Rangers, they asked me about the podcast, and or somebody said they had been listening to it, and a couple of guys hadn't yet. And so I said, yeah, we're pretty much deciding we're throwing out biblical masculinity. And I just let it hang. And they were all like, is he making a joke?
You said that. They didn't
I
say
said
it.
I
see.
And they were like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We're what? So I went into the explanation about the difference between biblical and manhood and kingdom.
Yeah.
Manhood. We're not throwing away the Bible or Scripture or even biblical behavior. But it's a larger...
Scriptures are still critical. They're essential to this conversation.
But it's like we say, there's a larger gospel.
Yeah.
Right? And so we want to invite guys into a larger idea of what kingdom masculinity is. And so anyway, we don't want to start doing another episode, but it was great.
Did you notice that Caleb kind of lost track of like what number session it was?
Yeah,
like
I don't know.
They stopped putting, what number it was, what part it was.
Put the title.
Just put titles on there. I'm like, all right, that's...
Today was, I think
we did 8 or 9.
We're recording, he's dropped the one about romance. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we had 8 or 9 sessions.
Yeah, probably.
On that. So I lost track too. But man, I
felt like we probably could have kept going too.
Love talking about it. And we will. I mean, we're gonna hit another version of, what we, I think years ago, we talked. I remember it being a thing in my heart that it was like passing along the good stuff, and we would pass along the good stuff to our ally. I mean, we create some resources and environments, but goodness,
sometimes recipes find you, or great restaurants find you,
and good equipment, good information, and good messages. So Graham Cook was somebody that I handed out. Dallas Willard, and in the spaces of social media with Instagram, Facebook, and all those things that you get it. People give it to you. Our Wednesday afternoon group. Yeah. Those guys drop. Not only for whatever happened in the NFL that weekend, but and funny stuff, but also the good stuff. Passing along the good stuff. So I think this series that we're going to step into for a while is in that vein. It has a lot of history with me. And listeners, we're going to explore with you in the Exploring More podcast the new Wild at Heart series that is now available on YouTube. They've been dropping since early October, and we've been watching, and we've been sharing these in some of the circles that we frequent because they're just good.
They are.
They're just really good. And
we talked for an hour and a half about the prologue the other day, which is the one we're doing today, right?
Yeah, which is kind of the overarching
overview
summary, and the direction that they're heading. And so, after the break, we're going to take a quick break. Would love to come back and just even share a little more about why, how connected my story is to this 25 years ago. So we'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast.
Heart of the Warrior encounter. The reason why I suggest it to men and try to get them to come to Heart of the Warrior is Heart of the Warrior is the only event I've ever been to in my life where you're amongst a bunch of men, yet you're alone with God. And it gives you time to completely unplug and really come to grips with where you are in your life and talk to God and figure out where you want to go. You will see transformation everywhere at the encounter. You will see people, this happen right before your eyes. And you'll come home energized, and you'll want your family, you'll want your friends, you'll want everybody you come in contact with to enjoy the same gift that you have from going to a Heart of the Warrior encounter.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. Love that promo on the Heart of a Warrior encounter. 2.5 days, get away with God, and let us guide you, caddy for you as you enter into the spaces of your story and healing and becoming. Yeah, overcoming and becoming.
And encounters with God, man.
Yeah, encounters with God through the Heart of a Warrior encounter in our home stadium of Young Life's Rockbridge Camp in Goshen, Virginia. And even that event is another great example in my story, our story, as our team, as the encounter weekend was very, very connected to Wild at Heart and their boot camp weekends and their experience, because that's where I was going in 2002 up until even the last one I went to that was kind of at the boot camp space was 2012. I've been to some other John Eldridge and Morgan and Bart and the Ransom Heart, now Wild at Heart team. I went to other weekends when they were offering things after that, but
more as a part of the team.
Yeah. And they, like we do, we have kind of alumni engaged in facilitating things for men that are stepping up and stepping into more.
It's a great culture.
But those weekends, as a customer, were life-giving, life-changing. And so, as we started Zoe, and in my story, left a wonderful organization called Campus Crusade for Christ, where Robin and I were for 17 years. But that's how eventful it was to transition from one place to, the unknown, to move from something, I wouldn't call it routine, SJ, I just would say, yeah, we knew our way around, to Zoe, which, we weren't sure how all this was going to go down. And that being like 2006. So even after that, I am riding with the boys of Wild at Heart and Ransom Heart, while at the same time you're starting to show up and come to encounter weekends. We don't have Heart of a Warrior yet, the book.
It was called Top Gun back then.
Yeah, but it was a gathering of men exploring the same themes. And so here we are. Yeah,
that's 15 years ago now.
Yeah, 25 years ago was my first weekend, and then your first weekend with us was 15?
Yeah, 2009.
I saw a picture of you.
I know.
Without your beard. And
I had a goatee.
That's right.
And longer hair.
Who were you standing with?
I was standing with Joe Stone. Joe Stone was praying over me.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
That's
cool.
That's some great stories. So, yeah, and what happened to me, and then maybe what happened to you, and then we can jump into the series a little bit more. But what happened to me, Wild at Heart was one of those books that followed the big Promise Keepers movement. So John wasn't a speaker or engaged in that. I don't think, even because it came out, I think, in '99, that Promise Keepers was pretty much shutting the doors by then, and it had a big almost 10-year run with these stadium events, 25, 30, 40 million men in DC. I was there. So men's ministry, had begun to kind of find a path thanks to Promise Keepers. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't one before that, but it was impacting a lot of people. And so I think John, the timing of Wild at Heart became really significant on the heels of that, because men were ready for something more, something else, something new, and they were awake. And so I look back and I think, man, that was good timing.
Yeah.
And he even mentions in the book, do we really need another book about men? And he says, no, what we need is a book about permission to be men. 25 years ago. Right. And I bring that just back for one quick plug. If you haven't seen the Biblical Masculinity, Kingdom Masculinity, that's 25 years later. That's what we were saying, why we did that whole series. We're still there. Yeah. In many ways, and still there with another generation of men, boys,
whole different
who were teenagers,
same challenges, different challenges, new methods of delivering the challenges, and yet here we are. We're still
not enough has changed.
Not enough has changed.
Not enough to alter the statistics that continue to move, as we'll see in some of this episode with Wild at Heart. But John and our friend Gary, who and Craig McConnell and Bart Hansen, Morgan Snyder, those guys, they stepped kind of out of the boat and onto that ground first, and then made a way for tens of thousands. I mean, it's the book itself, I want to say, is up there in the, it's over 10, I think it's over 10 million, maybe even more, 15 million copies sold. So something's got to be good in that book. Like you said about recipes before the break. If that's the recipe that's getting circulated, it must be pretty good. Pizza or meatloaf or whatever it is. Right. And so, as we've said before, SJ, I think that it strikes, Wild at Heart continues to strike a nerve in the hearts of men, because there's a nerve in the hearts of men that can be struck. Right. Yeah. And Heart of a Warrior and King Me, and yes, all the way back to Search and Rescue. I mean, those were... You were the one who called it those. You said, MT, you got a trilogy now. Right.
And, what's funny is that's so funny you just brought that up, because it landed on me that, it's really with John's book. Like, you sent me home from Top Gun in 2009 with a copy of Wild at Heart, because you hadn't written Search and Rescue yet.
Right. No, we got a book deal.
Yeah.
We had books from John.
Sent them home with the guys. Yeah. And so I read that book, and then so you could add, we could package those together, man. Wild at Heart, Search and Rescue, Heart of Warrior, and King Me, because Wild at Heart is sort of, what if, right? Men could be given permission to be men, and what does that mean? Because we've seen what it means, and it goes into the father wounds some, and it goes into those things. But I think Search and Rescue, the way you drove, and I know we weren't going to talk about this in this podcast, but here we are. I think in Search and Rescue, you did a great job. I mean, the whole premise of the book is we search and search for God, and then we're found. The C.S. Lewis quote, right? And the map and understanding where you are story, and all of that. Absolutely. And then Heart of a Warrior is about belovedness, and how so many of us enter into, it's like the Mask of Zorro. Right? Fight bravely, but die quickly. Because we don't know who we are. And where we are in that context, right?
So the subtitle was easy. Before you become the warrior, you have to become the beloved son. You have to receive the love of God in order to fight.
Yes, and then the progression in the masculine journey to the king stage with King Me, and now you start to get into more generational thinking, and not only your generations coming after you or your children going after you, but your own generation. Like, where was I in my first decade, my second decade, and kind of revisiting some of that. So
it's a good.
I love that progression of all four of those books.
I mean, to hook up those books with John's book, that's an honor. Number one. Number two, I think you said it well. I mean, there's a progression there. And John wrote books in similar progressions too, as he's discovering things, but this series, while I'm excited about it, why I'm so happy that they did it, and so excited for John and the team at Wild at Heart, is it's done so well. I mean, I remember those conferences that we were at in the early 2000s, and even into you remember at our outpost, CDs.
Oh yeah.
There wasn't downloads. There wasn't
Yeah.
QR codes.
And it was barely beyond cassette tapes.
I mean,
like it was early on.
No doubt. So
CDs.
So there's just this progression. There's this evolution.
Yeah.
And even as you'll see, the quality of this and what John does is I think what we aspire to do, and I believe do. We want to do it well. We want to do it with excellence. We want to do it in a way that, it stands with other things that are being produced out there in audio, video, and other ways of communication. And so I'm so proud of John and the team. They are really great. So what I was going to say, though, is this is, I believe, I haven't talked to John about this, but I believe this is their really good attempt at getting a message in its essence and core to the next generation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And giving a generation that probably isn't. We had bookstores. Caleb doesn't remember. There was Books A Million. There was Barnes and Nobles. There was
what was the big
Borders.
Christian? What was the big Christian bookstore?
Family Christian bookstore.
Family Christian bookstore. Yes.
And Mardell's and I mean you went to the store. So I think this is a great attempt to get that message in front of the next generation.
100%. And I want to add too, because part of our story, part of the reason we're sitting here is because of the generosity of John and Wild at Heart. They used to be called Ransom Heart.
Right.
Like that whole organization. When you tell the story of being at a boot camp and saying to John, you got to bring this to the East Coast. And this is paraphrasing, I'm sure, but it said, no, I'll give you all my talks and you take it to the East Coast.
Yeah, that's what
and here we are.
Yeah.
And so another example of that kingdom-minded generosity is, no, we're not going to put this behind a paywall.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Listeners, this is on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I want to jump in because there's more things we're going to say, but so this is available after we walk through this. So Caleb, we're going to hit part of this. So this is there's a couple trailers out there, but this is what they titled the prelude. So I think
prologue.
The prologue. Thank you.
It's okay.
We're going to see and listen to actually that half of it, and then respond and talk. But I think that this is kind of the overview of several men's stories in the series that they put together in order, and each man is a story. Each man's an episode and a story, in order for men to listen, to watch, to engage, and to feel, and to be impacted, and to relate. And so we're just going to do that. How does this impact us?
Yeah.
And share a little bit of that. But we're going to step right in now to the Wild at Heart series, the prologue. Here we go.
We are living in a moment that may be the breaking point for culture. A crisis of masculinity like the world has never seen on this scale. We have all heard plenty of stories of seemingly good men doing harm. What we need are stories of broken men becoming really good men. And that is why we made Wild at Heart, the series. It's 1995. I am fresh out of grad school, working as a therapist. When I was doing the research and the work for Wild at Heart, I was pulling together just a whole breadth of data on the essence of masculinity, the masculine soul, and the formation of good men. And these three rivers start converging in my life. I am working with mostly men, male clients who have blown their lives up, they're in trauma, they're in crisis for some reason. And I am raising 3 sons and trying to figure out how, because my own stuff is showing up. Unresolved trauma from my story. It's all coming together in the same moment. It was orchestrated to get me to go into the heart of men, the heart of boys, my own soul. You just cannot escape the imprint of a father, good and bad. I knew that I had to go back and face the things that I just ran from. I've been fishing this canyon for almost 30 years. A lot of history in here, a lot of stories. This is my dad. This is probably 1965. This is actually from that same day. So this is little me. As a little guy, I had my dad. And we would camp and fish, and it was just the golden years that every boy longs for. He was World War II generation. They didn't talk a lot. And like so many guys, he found some relief in the bottle. Everything falls apart. The fishing ends. And I grew up in an alcoholic home, and that is a pretty scary environment for a little guy. I should be an alcoholic. I should have blown my own marriage up. But the choice to face the pain and come out from hiding, it changed everything. A wound that is unacknowledged is a wound that cannot be healed.
By the time I was 18, 19 at art school, things started to take a really dark turn because I had no ability to kind of keep the things that I'd swept under the carpet, the rage, the agony, the anger. I just didn't know how. It started to tear up the carpet by that point.
Here's the wild stat. The #1 predictor of early mortality for centuries was poverty. Now, it's being male. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young men in the US. Depression among men is at an all-time high. It's a crisis of identity. It's a crisis of despair.
Found myself in this empty apartment, sleeping on an inflatable mattress, because everything that I had tried with all my strength to get was gone. I hated the man that I had become. And I hated that it had been exposed.
The key thing to understand about men and the crisis is that every man is wounded.
Oh boy.
I mean, man, that was
How many times have you seen this now? 3, 2 or 3?
3 or 4, yeah.
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 It's, me too.
And it's, yeah, maybe it's not the right analogy, but I just think of the the Christmas stocking on, Christmas morning. You see a couple little things sticking out of it, but it's so full.
Yeah.
There's candy in there. There's little matchbox cars, and you don't know what's in there. And that, whatever that was, 6 minutes that we listened to, the first half of the prologue, it's so chock full.
Yeah.
He leads off with, "We are at a breaking point of our culture."
Yeah.
That's a big statement, man.
And we agree. We know.
Yeah.
We know for 15 plus years, 25 plus years.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy of the tip of the iceberg, the part that's showing and how much more there is. And that's what happened to me. I know that's what happened to you. I'm going to say your line, and then if you want to, I remember you saying that, I remember going to my first Zoe event, and I just wasn't sure what they were saying. I just wanted them to keep talking about it.
Yeah, I had no idea. So, what are these guys talking about? I don't know, but I really like what they're saying.
Right.
And
same thing happened to me. I didn't, but the same thing happened in that. Ask me how many times I went back.
Yeah.
To Ransom Heart Wild at Heart events.
Yeah, how many times?
7.
As many as you could?
7. 7.
Yeah. I went
and I took my friends.
Yeah, man. I think I might have gone to 7 before you hired me onto the team.
Maybe.
You're like, hey, this guy, let's give this guy a tent or something.
Yeah, he keeps following the wagon.
Following the wagons
home.
around.
So that.
But I say Christmas stocking.
I just agree with you.
Yeah.
That's how I felt.
And the Christmas stocking is a good thing. But you look at this and you're like, whoa, we're at breaking point of culture, 100% injury rate, a wound unacknowledged as a wound that cannot be healed.
Agreed.
Those don't sound like good things.
Yeah.
But 15 years down the road, 25 years down the road, and what we want to encourage guys that are listening and watching to engage in is this message of healing that comes from Wild at Heart, that comes from Zoe, that comes from God in the kingdom. There's so much goodness in it, even though it's hard to go into, hard to talk about.
Yeah. Man, tons of agreement on so many fronts that I kept going back because I knew there was more. Mm-hmm. To your point, as to hear this and to know how much more true it is the 4th time you've watched this or the 15th year that you've been walking in this.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with John, and it was hard for me to find, every boy, every girl has been wounded, and the father's role in that is primary, is significant.
Oh man,
not solely, but
no.
So even exploring that, I didn't know, just particularly in that regard, I didn't know how deep some of my father wounds ran till almost 18, 19 years in. And it was just, that was some of my converging moments.
So deeply.
That was some of my, and I love my dad. And like what John said, I had my dad for so much of boyhood. And then John's story is his dad's, life.
Slowly disappearing.
Life and the erosion that can happen to men. And, so he loses him, looking for him in the canyon.
Yeah.
And so, when I think about some of the things that are coming up in this preview of things, I'm taken to, my journey of discovering and uncovering things and realizing this is way worse than I thought. Like, this is really bad. Mm-hmm. And this false self they call the poser, that I'm kind of, let's go, and my personality. And, I think that's where this particular theology and teacher and his team, took us into some caves, but brought light to say, you want to look at that? Jesus, is this, Michael? Mm-hmm. And so hearing it again and again, that's why I went back, because I wasn't hearing this anywhere else.
Yeah.
Other books, there was a few other books that John and the team would would use, and
Sacred Romance.
Yes,
Brett Curtis,
and Gordon Dolby and Healing the Masculine Soul,
yeah.
and others that, C.S. Lewis, of course, and Chesterton, and even back then, I listened to some of their podcasts now. I mean, these guys have explored more
Sure.
in their own stories.
Right.
I mean, the things that aren't necessarily in this series that they introduced me to even later in their discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So helpful. And then, like you said, some of the things I just had to go discover for myself with my friends. And so Search and Rescue becomes this, I got to write this. Men don't know where they are, and that this is hostile.
Mm-hmm.
Life outside the garden is hard.
Yeah, they don't know there's a map. They don't know that there's a trail to follow.
Yeah, we keep decorating our cell.
Mm-hmm.
This thing that as the gospel says, so easily entangles us. As Paul says, to get free and to enjoy freedom. It's Eisenhower who said, "Freedom is not long entrusted to the weak or timid."
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to protect this. You're gonna have to fight.
Mm-hmm.
That implies there's an enemy.
Yeah.
And it's not just you.
Right.
Not getting your stuff together, not doing it right or doing it well. So, 1995, his world starts, kind of moving in that way to where 99.
Yeah. He writes
it.
Yeah. And it's about the heart.
Yeah.
I'm chuckling because I heard him say 1995 and I was like, well, that's 30 years ago. Yeah.
It's just last decade.
Oh my gosh.
The
other one that really, really landed on me, and so a couple of times at the weekends, what we'll do is we'll make a statement just to kind of get the reaction or hear the reaction of the crowd. Like, when we do a grid of interactions between two people, it's false self on false self, or it's true self on false self, or true self on false self here, and then true self. How many of these are bad?
Yeah.
And they're like, what you don't ask it that way. What do you ask?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Okay.
How many of these more are bad or are negative or are 3 out of 4? Right?
3 out of 4. Right. And it's because we're trained to see the negative rather than. So the crowd kind of goes, oh, wow, kind of opens my eyes. So what just happened, he said, you cannot escape the imprint of a father, good and bad. Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute. You cannot escape the imprint of your heavenly Father, right? So this is the progression of healing. Mm-hmm. You see that at the very beginning. You cannot escape the imprint of a father, good or bad. So your father was either good for your heart, bad for your heart, and that's the center of your woundedness, and that's the center of where you need to go for healing.
Yeah.
But part of that healing is the journey of discovering that there is a father.
Yeah.
That is imprinted on you.
Yeah.
It's nothing but good, and you have Trinity DNA. Like, that's part of the progression. Yeah. And I loved hearing him say that because it just landed on me as I remember being at the beginning of the journey, and so many guys are going to be at the beginning of the journey with this new video series.
Yeah.
And that progression was so glorious to go from my whole identity is not centered in what happened to me or how my father treated my heart.
Yeah. It's 10 responses, but let me boil that down to one, and then we'll bounce back into the. But Jesus said, "I came for the sick." Mm. And the religious, the Pharisees said, "Oh, okay," and walked away. It's that idea.
He's kind of like, "Wait a minute." I'm talking about you. Yeah.
and that's I think where the father's imprint, good or bad, and every man is wounded, and an unacknowledged wound is an unhealed wound. Mm-hmm. You don't know it's worse than you think. Yeah. And you don't know that it can be better than you possibly could imagine. And so I think that's part of the magic. The kingdom magic of Wild at Heart is, it's, as you said, it starts to move you into that water of image bearing and what the wild one, the wild God that cannot be tamed, as C.S. Lewis said, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when he's asked, is Aslan safe? No. but he's good.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are those moments that make when you hear that, you go, whoa, I like that.
I want to be described that way.
How true it becomes. And that's why I went back so many times and started taking friends was I wasn't hearing this anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And then we were so early on the train that, as things were added, and I get to take guys back, we had the privilege of being on the front end of most of John's work, most of John's discoveries, and then, discovering for ourselves and writing some books and creating and offering the environments back in 08, 09, where because guides couldn't even get in.
Yeah, there's a lottery.
That was the challenge, guys. There was so many men trying to get into those weekends. And I'm just saying, it's the hungry and thirsty that resonate with this book, that'll resonate with this series. If you're not sick, if you're not
if you're Cypher,
right,
still plugged into the Matrix, right? And you enjoy being plugged into the Matrix.
It's not that this book is not for you. It's you're not ready.
That's right.
For this book in this series.
That's right.
And I think Heart of a Warrior, King Me, the same thing. Until you come to the end of something.
Yeah.
Yourself, hope. That, sometimes it just takes that kind of condition.
You're out of rope.
To make a man listen, to make a man explore, what am I going to do? And I think these stories that happen later in this series are evident of that.
Sure enough.
You're going to hear the expanded version of these stories. I think Pablo and Mark, that he's already touched on. But let's jump back in, and is that cool? Jump back in, and then we'll give some more thoughts on how this lands on us.
Why did you leave? Did you not care about me? Did you not love me?
And if he cannot name that wound, he cannot heal it.
Can't trust people. Can't trust myself. Can't trust anybody. I was just hurting.
And the thing is, if you ignore that internal chaos, it just creates chaos in their world. It creates chaos in their marriages, in their families.
I was, before my eyes, losing the most important person in my life, and I wasn't doing anything about it.
We've got to get to the healing of the masculine soul, because that is the crisis. All this is coming together into a language, a way of describing the heart of men. And I'm watching it work. It's working. It's healing marriages, families, communities. It's healing the souls of men. I wrote Wild at Heart in 6 months. It was so in me that it just flowed. I thought it might help heal the lives of a few men and their families. And God had other plans. And it became a global phenomenon. And the healing stories just started pouring in.
Stories of families healed over and over again.
Men, women, whole families, marriages, relationships with fathers and sons, fathers and daughters.
Got my dad back, got my husband back, got our family back.
We have a front row seat to the healing stories of men all around the world. Hundreds, thousands of them, really. And we just go, we got to tell these stories. So we have created Wild at Heart, the series.
This is a documentary series on 4 men's stories, 4 men around the world
who've been impacted, whose lives have been changed.
They're at different points in their lives: crisis in marriage, crisis in work, crisis with being a dad.
They're kind of everyday people from different walks of life. We wanted every man to be able to relate to the people in these films. I think there's going to be a lot of women who find these really helpful as well.
We are going back into their stories, picking up where the healing did not come, and watching, literally before your eyes, the healing journey and how it restores a man and his kids and his marriage.
Suddenly, everything that was confusing all seemed to make sense. I could look back through the course of my life and see all these moments. And I realized, God, you were in all of it. You were always there.
It is going to open up for you a world of hope. As you watch these stories, you're going to understand your own. For years, as a young man, I would go out on the river alone. I came home one day really upset, and Stace asked me, "Hon, what's up?" I said, I don't know. And then this sentence literally came out of my mouth. It said, "I'll never find him out there." I had no idea that all those years I was looking for my father on the river. As I began to heal, as I began to do my own work with my own story, I was able to forgive my dad. When I did, I was able to reach back out to him. He was a pretty old guy. And I started taking him fishing instead. And that was one of our last moments together in this canyon, fishing. You see, these stories don't have to end in disaster. There is a healing path. There is another way.
Yay. So good. So good. So some of my affiliation and connectedness with Wild at Heart. I mean, I know Leo, who's the third. He was in one of my groups that I got to facilitate.
That's cool.
At Good Soil. And Sam, who, the older man that you talked about trust. I got to sit with him in the facilitation of another group in kind of advanced spaces that we were doing. And so been in the room with Pablo and Mark. So it's really, it's a sweet thing to see these guys' stories. And, Andy's in the room and Caleb, story. It's these stories. Your story matters. These stories matter.
Sure.
And I love the strategy that John and the team are putting together, that if we could tell these stories of before and after, I think other men could relate to them and find, and he said the word, hope. Mm-hmm. And in that hope, as he said at the end, find the healing path that leads to the overcoming and becoming. And it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So much to think about and unpack. I think it's really cool. Those guys. That adds a layer of intrigue to it. What parts of their story are they going to share? But when you talk about hope coming from men sharing their stories, it's definitely been a part of my story. Finding hope in other men that have risked being vulnerable, and
right.
then God brought that word to me, as I've shared on the podcast before. It's such a ploy, such a plot of the enemy to convince you that you can't share what you've been through or what you've done, or what you're doing, because of the danger associated with that, the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, whatever it might be, and some guys might judge you for it. I've had that happen.
Right.
As I share an abortion story or drugs, alcohol, whatever in my past. There's some guys that kind of look down their nose that way.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But what I've found is way more guys, even if those particulars are not part of their story, just the idea that you can break free from things. And as he said, he talked about how so many men just ignore the chaos and expect it to go away.
Right.
I mean, to hear like, okay, not only can I engage in that chaos, whatever it is, usually the result of some behavior or decision or whatever it was.
And maybe not yours.
And maybe not yours. Maybe it's being imposed on you.
Right,
exactly.
Right.
But the idea that, I can engage in that chaos. Here's another guy that's done it in his story. I can too.
Right. Yeah.
And become more intimate with the Father and go on my healing path, on my healing journey.
I love that you added that last couple phrases, because it's not what I believed it was for so long, that I've got to go get my crap together and then come in and resubmit my paper, resubmit.
I redid it. I redid my test.
And it be like that, rather than
some remedial program,
rather than walk with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So I think this series is so helpful, especially when you know that you need help, and you're hopeful that there is help. There's a condition of your heart that meets the provider, the encourager, the support that is in this series. And so if we ask this question at all of our conferences, so I'm just going to ask it again.
Mm-hmm.
What are the odds you've interpreted your life accurately?
Mm-hmm.
So overwhelmingly, 100%.
Oh, that's one of those questions where the audience just goes, ooh.
Yes.
And they sometimes they
chuckle.
laugh.
Yeah, exactly. and so the reality that man, I haven't thought about that, but what are the odds? I misinterpret things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've misinterpreted your life, then you really are a potential customer for this. And if those things are somehow unfinished, unfathered, and particularly unhealed, this is a place for you to move in that direction. I think the road's pretty wide at the beginning, and then you start to find even your unique healing path. The other thing that made me think of, SJ, was hope. It's probably I've seen it in the Greek, I've seen it in the Hebrew. It's probably one of those words I'd like to adorn, my arm. I love that word, and yet it often is more impactful when you're in a place of desperation, when you're in a place of pain, when you're in a place of confusion, and somehow, there's hope. I think it's why we love and have engaged with The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. Yeah. Here's this cartoon, and like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. And they all need healing in their way.
Right. But the one that I thought of when he was saying it, the one that I felt like God kind of reminded me of was Shawshank. And Andy, who goes into solitary, comes out. Remember, he's in the lunchroom, the chow hall, and is talking about hope. The one thing they can't take from us in here is hope. And Red says, "What are you talking about?" And And Red goes on later to a dialogue of about being institutionalized.
Yeah.
Then Red gets paroled.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ends up on a bus. If you haven't watched Shawshank in for the reality of that word, then you've really missed Shawshank. There's a lot of crap that goes on in Shawshank Redemption.
That's hard to
but
go
the
through,
real thread of it
mm-hmm.
is hope.
Mm-hmm.
And when Red gets out, because Andy gets out, he
mm-hmm.
escapes.
Mm-hmm.
And when Red gets out, he has then a monologue at the end on the bus. I feel like a boy again. Hopeful. I hope I can find my friend. I hope
I can make it across the border.
I hope, yes.
Yes.
and it's hope and hope. And here was the one who was not ready. Here was the one who was not ready for Andy's message about hope. He says, "What are you talking about? Hope is a dangerous thing, man."
Yeah.
And the institutionalized. And I think that's what happens and does happen to so many men in this life outside the garden, in fallenness. We unfortunately get our version of being institutionalized and being told what a man is and isn't.
Mm-hmm.
When I think the only one who can really show and tell us that is the one who made us, the one who loves us, the one who's for us. So I think this is a great setup.
It is
for what we want to explore more of, and that is, why. I'll just end it with this. Why Wild at Heart is so important in this conversation. Why this video series? Why story? Why going back in order to go forward free, more free?
John said it. There is another way other than disaster.
Really?
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So, this will be good. So, thank you for joining us on the Exploring More podcast. We are going to dive in more to the Wild at Heart series over the next weeks, and appreciate any likes, forwards, pass it along, reviews.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Let us know what you think about the video series in the comments. What did you hear that maybe we didn't touch on or heard it differently?
It's on YouTube. Just search Wild at Heart series and it will come up, and you can move with us.
I'm sure Caleb will probably put a link in the description too.
Yep.
So he's good.
And have your own conversations with some of your friends. Bring them around to explore more of the kingdom, who you are in it, and how it works. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.